there is a Hall of Famer that is the captain of the Channel 7 commentary team. His name is Bruce McAvaney. He and Nuke are going to have a chat. Please enjoy it. Sit down, take a seat. Welcome, Bruce McAvaney.
What an honour, John. I mean, the cavalcade, the cavalcade before you. It is the great club of Australian sport, isn't it? To be a member of it.
Well, Bruce, when you grow up having a dream of maybe playing at Wimbledon and representing Australia in Davis Cup, and all the people that have come before me, you look around at the legends here. They're the ones that I grew up idolising, and I find myself sitting up here on stage. It's pretty humbling.
Well, Kenny's here tonight, Muscles is here, and so Rod Laver and Ken Rosewell and Yvonne Corley and Margaret Court and John Newcombe are now the legends. Nuke, not only were you a great player, you were a great competitor. You had a fire in your belly. Was it mum or dad? Where did it come from?
Well, I think that most people who make it to the top, they can look back at their early childhood and remember things that happened that stuck with you. And I had a fire in my belly when I was a young kid, and my mum was the one who really encouraged me to use that fire in a positive way rather than a negative way. And I listened to that advice, and it's the best advice I can give to young kids today when they're playing sport, that if you do have that fire in your belly, it can go one of two ways. If it goes in a negative way, you're never going to make it. If you use it, that fire in a positive way, it can be a tremendous support for you. I think I gave Pat Rafter a big speech about that for a Davis Cup match at White City in 1997.
Your mum and dad actually met on a tennis court, and you've spoken about your mum and what she gave you. You and your father had a fateful match when you were 9 years of age at Portsea. Do you want to tell us how that happened and what it led to, John?
It's interesting how things happen. Parents took myself and my two sisters down to Portsea, and I had never beaten my dad at that time. He was just a social player, and I beat him 6-4. I drop shotted and lobbed him, and he really got upset with me. And there was a gentleman watching by the name of Mr. Schrader, and he was very close with Harry Hopman. And he wrote to Hop and said, there's this young kid that's I've seen playing, and he's pretty good. And anyway, Mr. Hopman got in touch with my parents, and he invited me out to the 1954 Davis Cup at White City for the boys' training. Ken wouldn't remember that, but the year before I'd crouched by the radio. I was 9 years of age, and they played the great Davis Cup match in Kooyong. Ken and Lou were the young kids chucked in, and for 4 days I listened on the radio while they won. And now here I was a year later out, and Hop got me to have a hit with Merv Rose for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then I went with my dad out and watched the Davis Cup match and watched Lou and Ken, and that was when the dream really set in. That's what
at 10 years of age,
that's what I wanted to do.
At 10 years of age, because you're good at cricket and you're good at rugby. When you were 12, you made a big call. You decided that you would commit yourself to tennis. And John, I chatted to you last week about it and how you went about training. It was a little bit of the Bradman style you had, because you set some things up at home to teach yourself with ball toss and serving. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, we didn't have a lesson, every day like kids play 3 hours a day now. I arranged a couple of practice times, and I would have a 1 hour lesson once a week. But after school, I'd come home and I had a line across the back wall of our house. It was 3 foot high, and I drew little circles all along the line, and then I measured the distance back on our back lawn, and I'd stand there and I'd serve for about 15, 20 minutes just hitting these targets, and then I'd go and try and beat the wall volleying, and then my coach was encouraging me to have a big serve, and he said without a good ball toss you can't have a great serve, so I'd stand there and I'd just toss the ball up until I could hit it down on the ground in a little circle 10 times out of 10. And little things like this, it'd be about 45, 50 minutes practice session. Nobody told me I had to do it. And then I'd get on my bike and go up the oval and play with all my mates up there doing whatever we were doing. But that 45, 50 minutes of concentrated practice, just self-made, was, I think it was a great help later on.
We could talk forever tonight. We haven't got forever, but and your coach Henry Lindo and taught you the big game, and you went to Hurstville with that young group. But I wanted to ask you about two matches, and then a little bit about Hop and Davis Cup. You'd already won Wimbledon, and you'd already won a US, I reckon, by the time you got to the 1970 Wimbledon final with Kenny. Rocket had beaten you, I think, at Wimbledon. So just talk to us a bit about 1970 and Muscles, because you said to me it was a step up in a way playing against Rosewell, but when you played against Rosewell at Wimbledon, you weren't just taking on Kenny, were you? Because he was pretty popular.
Well, you've got to remember, Bruce, what I was telling you just a while ago. Here I was, 9 years of age and 10 years of age. Ken and Lou were two of my idols. And it was one of my great privileges to play against Rocket in '69 in the Wimbledon final, and Ken in 1970. Lost against Rod, and then against Ken, he hates me talking about it because I won that match and he beat me a number of other times, but it was an extremely emotional match for me. Ken was the outright favourite with the crowd, and I'd never experienced that at Wimbledon before. He was the older guy and he hadn't won Wimbledon, and so the crowd wanted him to win, and he won the first set in a tight one, and I won the next two and led him 3-1 in the fourth, and I felt like I was right on top, and the crowd picked him up, and I got into a sulk because I'd miss a shot and everyone would clap, and Ken had hit a winner and they'd go crazy, and I was saying, well, why are they hating me? I want to win this match too. Anyway, from 3-1, Ken won the next 5 games and won the set 6-3, and I changed ends and I stood there. We didn't have chairs then, and we had to pour our own Robinson's barley water. And I pour him a drink, and I said to myself, how badly do you want to win this match? And I said, well, yeah, I really want to win it bad. And, well, if you want to win it bad, you've got to go out in that court and you're going to see nothing except a tennis ball. There'll be an opponent down the other end of the court. You don't see anything else. And in that 60 seconds, I put myself into a zone where I went out and I managed to win the fifth set 6-1. And afterwards, some of the sports people were saying earlier, it takes you a few days to come to grips with what you've actually done. And I was thinking a couple of days later, wow, I'm really proud I was able to win Wimbledon, and I thought, no, I'm actually more proud of what I did in that 60 seconds at the net. I went from a total negative frame of mind into a total positive frame of mind, and was able, on that court, in that atmosphere, was able to put it all together for that fifth set. So I'm sorry to tell that story, Ken. I know you hate me for it, but you can come out in the car with me tomorrow morning.
You both, John, it is an incredible story. And you've got such an affection for Wimbledon. I mean, and I want to now go to the Australian Open. With Wimbledon, I'm guessing, did the only final you lose at Wimbledon was to Laver in singles? Did you win every other final that you played at Wimbledon?
Yeah, I played 4 singles and 6 doubles, and I won 9 out of 10. So I had a 90% winning record in finals at Wimbledon, which is, I'm pretty proud of that too.
Yeah, and you've got this enormous relationship with the tournament. We know that. 1975, New Year's Day, Jimmy Connors, Australian Open. But the seeds of this were sown in 1973. Lots was going on in tennis, a revolution as such. You're on the tennis ranch with Ange in 1973, and you say to yourself, okay, I can either go one of two ways.
Well, by mid-73, we had our third child, and it was becoming increasingly hard to travel the circuit. I was actually ready to quit. And Angie talked me out of it. And I said, okay, if I play, I'll play for 9 more months, going through to WCT at the end of May in Dallas to the finals, which a tournament I hadn't won. And I said, in a month's time, I'll win the US Open and then I'll win WCT. They were my 2 goals, and I went to work and got fit and trained, and I achieved all that. And by May, I was #1 in the world, which is not anything I set out to do. I just had those other targets, but #1 came along. When I won the US in '73, I'd played Jimmy, and I'd beaten him in straight sets in the quarter-final. So we never played during 1974, and I kind of had a bit of a grudge against him because he sued the Association of Tennis Professionals, and he was, and he smashed Ken at Wimbledon in the US, and I hated him for that. So by the end of the year, we hadn't played. He was #1, I was #2. I wasn't going to play the Australian Open because it was over Christmas, and I said, I've had enough of doing that. And then they called me and said,
John Brown called you.
John Brown called me and said, Connors is coming, will you change your mind? It was 10 days before the tournament started. I said, you guarantee me he's there and count me in. So I hadn't played for a month, and I had to start doing some very serious training. I didn't play much tennis, but I did a lot of road work and other stuff. And I came into the tournament. We got through to the quarters. I wasn't playing that well. I was struggling a bit, but physically I thought I was okay. And we'd had rain, so we had to play Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. The final was New Year's Day on Wednesday. I beat Jeff Masters 10-8 in the 5th on Monday and played a doubles match after that. On Tuesday, I beat Roche 11-9 in the 5th from 5-2 down and saved 4 match points. Had no memory of the last 45 minutes of the match. I had a goal, and it was to get to Connors. I wanted him.
And Stan Nichols played an incredible part in that whole thing.
I went to Stan on Monday night. He worked on my legs for 2 hours, and 2 hours he worked on my legs Tuesday night. I woke up New Year's Day, and I thought, gee, I feel all right. And so I went and jogged a mile, and body seemed to stay intact. So I went out in the court, but I didn't watch that match again until about 12 years later. Someone gave me a copy, and I could see between every point I was just walking slow and breathing and just trying to conserve every bit of energy, because Jimmy was a tough son of a gun, and I knew that it was going to come down to the wire in the end. And as it turned out, I served for the match at 5-3 in the 4th. Jimmy played a great game and broke me, and then I beat him 9-7 in the tiebreak in the 4th. And I don't know what would have happened had I lost the 4th, because I was running on empty at that stage.
Jimmy's still pissed off because he had set point to go to 2 sets, or he went to your backhand on the 7. You hit a backhand winner. How many backhand winners did you hit in your life?
Oh, don't you start. He first serve wide out to my backhand. He came to the net, and I hit a winner cross court. Hit one on the first point of the tiebreak down the line as well.
Nuke, I won't go on, but I've just got to ask you about Hoppy and Munn Davis Cup Tigers. Fraser's in the room as well, but why did you want to assassinate Hoppy? I mean, you said, you told me you spent a lot of your years trying to work out, how can I assassinate Hoppy? How tough was he on you?
Well, people like Harry Hopman, they're great trainers of a group of young men, and if you learn the lessons. In '64, I was on my 4th trip overseas, and Roche and Owen Davidson and myself and Fred Stolly and Emmo were the 2 senior players, and we're playing in Sweden in a resort town, and we'd go to this restaurant every night for dinner, and Hop would say, Emmo and Fred, would you like a beer? And they'd say, yeah, thanks, Hop. And he'd say, well, do you boys want soup or milk? So then we'd finish dinner, and he'd say, well, Fred and Emmo, you go off to nightclub or whatever, be home, you know, at a good hour, and then he'd take us down to the ice cream shop and buy us an ice cream. And he used to love making me room with him. And in Montreal, he told me to be home. We went out for dinner, and he told me to be home by 10 o'clock. I got home at 1 minute past 10, and he just read the riot act to me. Well, you can either, you know, I mean, when I said I wanted to assassinate, underneath, inside, I knew what he was getting at. You haven't won Wimbledon yet. You're a very good young player, but if you don't have discipline, you are never going to achieve your dreams. So that was the message, and that's the message that, well, Nick Kyrgios was sitting over here tonight. He's gone home to bed and training now. But that's the type of message I'd like to get across to young guys like Nick, that, you know, without discipline, none of these great sports people out here, sitting out here tonight or on the walls there, none of them would have achieved anything. Nick,
just a couple more minutes, but Fraser had to make a tough decision. You won the 4 Davis Cups in a row, and then you didn't play Davis Cup for about 5 years. WCT weren't allowed to play. And there was a famous time in 1973. I mean, it was Stan Smith, I think, Tom Gorman, Eric Van Dillen for the Americans. They dominated it. We were coming back. You'd committed, Rod had committed, Ken had committed, and I think Mal Anderson, was it Mal Anderson?
Yes.
So Fraser, who's in the room, had to choose between Laver, Roseville and Newcombe. And I mean, that must have been so tough. And our history shows in the end that Laver and Newcombe played all 5, and you beat them 5-love. It was one of the most famous results in the history of Australian sport. But it must have been tough for Fraser.
It was Fraser's toughest decision. He still feels bad about it today for Ken. But and I'm sure that the first day's play, Fraser was feeling very nervous because we won the tie 5-0. But it took Rod and I 8.5 hours to beat them on the first day. I won in 5 sets, and I was down a break in the 5th against Smith, and Rod was down 2-1 against Tom Gorman, came back, and then Rod and I played the doubles the next day, and Smith and Van Dillen liked their chances because they'd never lost in a Davis Cup match, but we hadn't been allowed to play for 5 years, as you said, so Rod and I gave them 5 games in 3 sets. Just to finish it off.
It's a nice touch-up. And then the captaincy with Roche. You told me 7 of the best years of your life, and you know, we had Mildura to Nice was a big trip, wasn't it? You know, from the 7 years that Roche and I ran the Davis Cup team were 7 of the best years Tony and I have had. To do it with your best mate, and to take a group of young men who hadn't played Davis Cup before, and when they started out, they never believed that they could be the best. And they thought a quarter-final of a Grand Slam would be a great achievement. And we said, no, guys, the bar's up here. It took us 5 years to get these guys really believing in themselves and what they could achieve. At the end of 5 years, we had the best team in the world. We'd had lows like this where we lost in Mildura, and every time we had a really bad low, we said to the guys, you know, when you got to get up off the floor, and when you get up, you got to stand taller than when you're knocked down. This is the test of your character, and if you want to get up and stand taller, Tony and I will be with you every inch of the way. So after 5 years, we are the best team in the world. I think we won 10 of 11 of the next matches we played. When we won the Davis Cup finally in Nice in 1999, we played on 4 continents. We played on 4 different surfaces, and we never had the same team twice because of injury. We blooded a young guy by the name of, he wasn't a young guy, he was 28 years of age, by the name of Wayne Arthurs. Never played Davis Cup, never been in a Davis Cup team. But because we'd created this unbelievable culture, Wayne played a match in Brisbane that nobody could believe it. He smashed Kafelnikov, who was number 2 in the world, on the opening day. And it was just what you can do with team culture. You see it in team sports all the time. People, very good players, become great players because of the culture that's been created. And that was
a different experience entirely from your own playing experiences, but as I said before, to do it with Roachie and to achieve what we achieved with such a great group of young men, it was a real thrill.
John, I'll conclude. I mean, John's worked for every network in the United States, every Australian network. He's still working for us at Seven, as Hamish said, and he's a brilliant commentator. He did so many endorsements. Canon chose him in 1970s, the moustache, etc. I mean, we know he's larger than life. Nick, I want to finish this way, maybe slightly self-indulgent. You're at your prime, physically and mentally. You're playing at Wimbledon in the final. You couldn't get yourself any better. Who's the one bloke you'd like to play against?
Gee, there's a lot, and you know when you're commentating, you often go through your mind, how would I play against this guy, that guy? I really think the one guy I would enjoy playing against would have been McEnroe.
I wonder why. We would love you to have beaten him.
I could have had a lot of fun with him.
I'm sure you could have. I tell you what, we've had a lot of fun with John Newcombe over the years. It is the highest honour, as Hamish and Steph said, Nuke. You've given us so much joy. There's so much affection for you in the sporting and I think the wider community in Australia. I guess all I can say in the end is beauty, Nuke. Well done. Congratulations. You're one of a kind. You're a beauty. Oh, lovely, Nuke. Good boy.